Chapter 9, Quittin' Time. We're fed up with those two boys, cried Miss Creant. They're always making fun of our cooking. Yes, said Mrs. DePoint, our food isn't that bad. I ate here once and hardly got sick at all. Well, I can't punish them if we don't have any proof, said Mr. Krupp. Fine, said lunch ladies. Then we quit. Ladies, cried Mr. Krupp, be reasonable. You can't just quit on such short notice. But the lunch ladies didn't care. They marched right out of Mr. Krupp's sticky green office, and that was the end of that. Rats, cried Mr. Krupp. Now where am I going to find 3 new lunch ladies by tomorrow morning? Suddenly there was a knock on Mr. Krupp's door. 3 very large women wearing lots of makeup walked into his office. Hello, said the first woman. My name is, Zorgset. These are my, sisters, Clackset and, Jenniferette. We've come to apply for jobs as cafeteria ladies. Well, that was easy, said Mr. Krupp. Now to take care of George and Harold. Chapter 10, Busted! George and Harold were in study hall when they heard the dread announcement over the intercom. George Beard and Harold Hutchins, please report to Mr. Krupp's office immediately. Oh no, cried Harold, we're busted. No way, said George. Remember, what happened yesterday was not our fault. We didn't do it. It was an accident. But Mr. Krupp was not as understanding. I can't prove it, but I know you boys are responsible for yesterday's disaster, Mr. Krupp said. I'm going to punish you by taking away your cafeteria privileges for the rest of the year. No more cafeteria food for you two. No more cafeteria food, whispered Harold. I thought he said he was going to punish us. Yeah, George smiled. Maybe if we're really bad, he'll take away our homework privileges too. I heard that, screamed Mr. Krupp. From now on, you boys are going to have to pack your own lunches and eat in my office so I can keep an eye on you. Rats, said Harold. But we didn't do it, George protested. We didn't do it. Too bad, Bub, said Mr. Krupp. Boy, said George, this is probably the first time we've gotten in trouble for something we didn't do. Unless you count all those times we didn't do our homework, said Harold. Oh yeah, laughed George. Chapter 11, Brown Bagonet. The next day, George and Harold each brought their own sandwiches to Mr. Krupp's office for lunch. I'll trade you half of my peanut butter and gummy worm sandwich, said George, for half of your tuna salad with chocolate chips and miniature marshmallow sandwich. Sure, said Harold. You want some barbecue sauce on that? You kids are disgusting, Mr. Krupp shouted. Soon George and Harold were munching on potato chips with whipped cream and chocolate sprinkles. Mr. Krupp was turning green. What's for dessert? Asked Harold. Hard-boiled eggs dipped in hot fudge and Skittles, said George. Ah! Screamed Mr. Krupp. I can't stand it any more. He got up and stumbled out the door for some fresh air. You know, said George, now that Mr. Krupp is gone, we could run to the cafeteria and change the letters around on a lunch sign. Cool, said Harold. Today's lunch. Freeze-dried worm guts, Boston-baked boogers, zombie nerd and milkshakes. So George and Harold sneaked to the cafeteria, but when they read the lunch sign, they were a bit confused. What's going on here? Said George. It looks like somebody's already changed the sign, said Harold. Forget the sign, said George. Look at everybody. They've changed. It was true. All the kids and teachers in school were entering the cafeteria looking as normal as ever, but they were leaving the cafeteria looking quite different. Look, cried George, they're all wearing broken eyeglasses held together with masking tape, and they've all got vinyl pocket protectors. They've all turned into nerds, Harold gasped. And look at their skin, said George. They're all gray and clammy. That could only mean one thing. They're zombie nerds? Asked Harold. I'm afraid so, said George. Let's just hope they're friendly, said Harold. Who ever heard of a friendly zombie nerd? Asked George. I'm afraid, Harold whined. There's no time to be afraid, said George. We got to get to the bottom of this. That's what I'm afraid of, said Harold. Chapter 12, The Bottom of This. George and Harold crawled into the cafeteria and sneaked through the kitchen doors. There they hid behind a table while the incredibly naughty cafeteria ladies from outer space discussed their plans to take over the world. Look at those puny earthlings, laughed Zorks. They're all drinking evil zombie nerd milkshakes and transforming before our very eyes. It won't be long now, said Clax. Tomorrow we'll feed them super evil rapid growth juice. Then they will grow to the size of cliff trees. Exactly, sneered Jennifer. They will unleash our giant evil zombie nerds upon the earth, and soon the planet will be ours. The three evil space heads threw back their heads and laughed hysterically. We gotta tell Mr. Krupp about this, Harold whispered. Right, whispered George. But first, we gotta get rid of that super evil rapid growth juice. George carefully reached up and swiped the carton of juice. What should we do with it? Asked Harold. Let's pour it out the window, said George. That way it won't do any damage. Good idea, said Harold. While the naughty cafeteria ladies continued laughing, George quietly emptied the carton of super evil rapid growth juice out the window. You know, whispered Harold, Mr. Krupp is never going to believe that sinister cafeteria ladies from outer space have turned everybody into evil zombie nerds. Sure, he'll believe us. He's got to believe us, said George. I hope he believes us. Chapter 13. He doesn't believe them. That's the most ridiculous story I've ever heard, laughed Mr. Krupp. But it's true, cried Harold. Yeah, said George. Everybody in the entire school is an evil zombie nerd. The kids, the teachers, everybody. All right, said Mr. Krupp. I'll prove it to you. He pressed a button on his intercom and called for his secretary. Soon Miss Anthrop entered the room. She was dressed in a pink polka-dot polyester dress with orthopedic knee-high stockings and ugly brown arch support loafers. See, said Harold, she's dressed like a nerd. She always dresses like that, snapped Mr. Krupp. But she's gray and clammy and reeks of freakish zombified death. She always smells like that, Mr. Krupp argued, and she's always gray and clammy too. George and Harold had to admit that school secretaries were not very good subjects to compare and contrast with evil zombie nerds. But then Miss Anthrop leaned over and took a huge bite out of Mr. Krupp's desk. Must destroy Earth, she moaned as she took another bite. Even Mr. Krupp had to agree that Miss Anthrop was acting a bit more evil than usual. Munch, munch. So George and Harold took Mr. Krupp down to the cafeteria to confront the evil lunch ladies. Suddenly, out of the shadows stepped the evil Zorks. Gotcha! Zorks cried as he grabbed onto Harold's shoulders. Ah! Screamed Harold. He squirmed away, pulling Zork's gloves off and revealing two slimy green tentacles. See, Mr. Krupp, said George. We told you they were evil space guys. Snap! You fools! Screamed Zorks. Now we will destroy you! The evil Zorks pointed his tentacle at George, Harold, and Mr. Krupp and snapped at his fingers. Snap! Suddenly, Mr. Krupp began to change. A heroic grin spread across Mr. Krupp's face. He threw out his chest and placed his fist firmly at his sides, looking quite triumphant. Uh-oh, said George. That evil space guy just snapped his fingers. Now Mr. Krupp is turning into you-know-who. Hey, wait a second, said Harold. Tentacles don't have fingers. You can't snap a tentacle. There's no time to argue the physical improbabilities of the story, said George. We gotta stop Mr. Krupp from changing into Captain Underpants before it's too late. Chapter 14. It's too late! Mr. Krupp turned and dashed out the door. His clothes flew up behind him as they always echoed with jubilant proclamations about the superiority of underwear. George and Harold dashed after him, but the door was quickly blocked by Zorks, Clax, and Jennifer. You want to get out of this kitchen? The evil Jennifer mocked. You gotta go through us. George grabbed a rolling pin. Harold grabbed a cast-iron frying pan. I sure hope we don't have to resort to incredibly graphic violence, said Harold. Me too, said George. Chapter 15, the incredibly graphic violence chapter, Part 1 in Flipperama. Warning! The following chapter contains terribly inappropriate sayings that certainly do not belong in a children's book. If you are offended by such senselessness, please put this book down immediately, raise your arms over your head, and run screaming to your nearest shoe store. When you get there, ask them to make you a cheeseburger. No, this probably won't help you a bit, but we think it will be funny. Introducing Flipperama! Lately, there have been many groundbreaking advances in the field of animation. There's claymation, dynamation, Japanese anime, and even computer animation. But if you ask us, nothing beats the economy-sized thrills of cheesy animation technology, also known as Flipperama. Here's the instructions, but we already know how it works, so we're just gonna commence forth. George pins a predator. Harold bonks a bad guy. George and Harold save the day for now. Chapter 16, The Assault of the Equally Evil Lunchroom Zombie Nerds. George and Harold had barely caught their breath when Captain Underpants finally showed up. "Tra-la-la," he said, "I'm here to fight for truth, justice, and all that is pre-shrunk and cottony." Where were you back in chapter 15 when we needed you?" asked George. "I was at the shoe store ordering a cheeseburger," said Captain Underpants. While our three heroes were talking, nobody noticed that Zorks, Clax, and Jennifer had slithered away. The wounded space guys approached the lunchroom loudspeakers and called for their evil zombie nerds. "Zombie nerds!" instructed Jennifer. "Destroy Captain Underpants and his little friends, too." Soon every evil zombie nerd in the entire school put down their Omni magazines and headed for the cafeteria. "Must destroy Underpants," they groaned. "Must destroy Underpants!" Suddenly our three heroes were surrounded by evil, vicious zombie nerds. Closer and closer they came. "Oh no!" cried George. "What do we do now?" "To the underwear cave!" shouted Captain Underpants. "There is no underwear cave," said Harold. "Really?" said Captain Underpants. "Well, let's just climb up that ladder instead." George, Harold, and Captain Underpants scurried up the ladder, and soon they were all on the roof. "Well, we're safe now," said Harold. "Yep," said George. "That's for sure," said Captain Underpants.